The spirit molecule, also known as DMT or dimethyltryptamine, this is one of the drugs that people commonly talk about with this kind of like hushed awe. Like it is genuinely weird and even the history is strange. So let me explain everything you need to know about DMT from a drug scientist perspective. So first, DMT is naturally found in a lot of different plants and animals. So it's one of those things that's been around for a while, and people even suggest that it might be its own type of neurotransmitter. But the reason why we have it, we're not entirely sure. There are some suggestions that like we make it for dreaming, because when people take it, it actually very closely resembles in like brainwave activity and how it's working. It seems to actually mimic that state and might be considered kind of like a waking dream. Other scientists have suggested that it might be something that is released during a near-death experience. So maybe it is like your brain's response to incredible levels of stress all occurring at the same exact time. And so it is like maybe like a defense mechanism of your brain. Now, there's a lot of debate about that. So they've actually given like healthy participants a questionnaire, had them take this drug, and then looked to see if they report near-death experience like qualities, like the same scale that they use for people who've actually had a near-death experience. And you found that they are very similar. But here's the thing, we can't really come up with a great ethical experiment for this. Like, are you going to induce somebody into a near-death experience? Are you just only finding people who've had near-death experiences and making them try this drug? Not really a great way to actually do this experiment. So all of this is theoretical as of right now. And of course, with everything theoretical, there is a person who did the math that basically said, like, there is nowhere near enough DMT that could be produced in your brain to actually cause this sort of effect. The math here, to be fair, is a little bit weird. So they said that you need about 25 milligrams of DMT to be able to produce this experience. So they said that like we only can produce about 30 micrograms of melatonin, which is 1,000th the weight of DMT, which means that it's impossible. I'm not sure I'm tracking their math here, but they say that it's impossible using math. Again, mysterious drug. We're not entirely sure. So could be linked to dreaming, could be linked to near-death experiences. We don't know for sure. There's probably a group of people who are watching this video and you're like, I have zero idea what DMT is. You might be more familiar with a different version of it, which is ayahuasca. So that is commonly used in like spiritual and religious ceremonies, and it's actually a combination of two different drugs. So I have a sleeve of psychoactive plants. So it is a combination of the bark of a specific tree with the berries of another plant, Psychotria viridis. And only when you combine the bark with another thing that produces DMT can you actually have those effects. So the bark actually has what is known as an MAOI in it, so monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So what happens is that if you try to take DMT orally, it will basically be immediately broken down and become no longer psychoactive. But like in this case, the bark of the tree is acting as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, so it is preventing that breakdown, which then means that the drug can actually work in your system. This is something that indigenous folk have been using for long periods of time. So they've already figured out that the combination of those two drugs will actually lead it to be available orally. So that is the method that they've been using for it for a while. Now, when we first started doing the original science on that, we didn't actually know that. So like a lot of the early research was done actually by a psychiatrist whose name was Zara. And basically what he was trying to do was find a way to look at the biological kind of underpinnings, like how schizophrenia was actually working. So he wanted to find a drug to be able to do that. So he initially saw acid. Acid had just kind of recently been released, but due to like bureaucracy and government and illegal things, he couldn't actually get a hold of acid. So he looked at all of the scientific research and found this discussion of this plant used in indigenous ceremonies, and then was like, I think that one component of this, specifically DMT, is the thing that's psychoactive, so let me try that. And that's what he did. So first he just like synthesized it himself. He was also a chemist, so he could do that. So he synthesized it himself and then tried it, but he tried it first orally, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't work. I guess that's just not a thing that's going to end up becoming a drug. And then somebody's like, okay, but like maybe instead inject it. And for some reason he agreed to this idea. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll just try to inject it instead. And then found the very strong effects of DMT. And when I say very strong effects, I mean very strong effects. So typically the effects peak at like 2 minutes and last between 10 and 15. So very short, extremely powerful. Like this is sometimes considered a visionary hallucinogenic because it basically makes you feel as though the world is completely different from what you thought. And notice that I'm struggling with my words here. In fact, we don't necessarily know how to discuss the type of trip that this causes. So Terence McKenna, who was known as a psychedelic bard, which is both a great band name and also a new class that I would love my GM to make in my D&D campaign. So like, please do this if you see this. But Terence McKenna, who is one of the people who is famous for bringing DMT in the forefront, was basically like, we don't have words to express this. So his exact quote is, and language cannot describe it accurately. Therefore, I will inaccurately describe it. The rest is all lies. Like, he's basically saying that you literally can't talk about this experience using the language that we currently have. I highly recommend that you actually read personal accounts of this because they're kind of fascinating. It works similarly to like the other hallucinogens too. So it works on the serotonin system, which means that if you use it, especially in combination with things like antidepressants, it might produce serotonin syndrome, which is when you have too much serotonin in your system, because a lot of drugs increase serotonin. It's also been linked to things like psychosis, although those are mostly case reports. It's considered relatively physiologically safe. So on a physical side, it's not going to necessarily do anything that will lead to an overdose or any sort of potential harm. But that does not mean that it is psychologically safe. So there are a lot of cases where people take hallucinogens and have a very bad time, and this can be potentially psychologically traumatizing. And similar to other hallucinogens, you could also microdose this, and that seems to work too. Now, here's the thing. We don't know a ton about this drug, and that is because it is first a Schedule 1 drug, which means that it is considered to not have any medicinal effects and to be highly addictive. So people who, like me, have a Schedule 2 through 5 license, we can't actually do research on it. The fast effects also make it incredibly difficult to study. So you're like talking about minutes in terms of doing research on how a person is experiencing this. And we can't actually watch like levels as they are occurring in the brain. We can for things like rats and other mammals, but not for humans because that requires like brain surgery. So we can't actually do the research to see when DMT is spiking or like when it's occurring naturally. We have done some research. So Strassman was a genuinely phenomenal scientific researcher who did research on this. That is The Spirit Molecule, his original book, genuinely fascinating from a science perspective. And we're seeing a resurgence in research. So a lot of the research studies that I've been talking about in this video have actually been from like 2020 on. And there was a recent grant that was just awarded to UC San Diego to do more of this research too. And that's because this might have a lot of benefits in therapeutic settings. So it could help with things like depression. It might actually help with things like stroke. And it might help with things like alcohol addiction and neurodegenerative disorders too. But again, all of this is relatively new because it's decently difficult to study. So DMT is like the crown jewel for drug scientists. It is this naturally produced drug that produces like these kind of weirdly supernatural effects for reasons why we don't know, which potentially have incredibly complex therapeutic applications. So I'll keep updating you on the findings of DMT, but now you know just how mysterious it is too.